Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Bourne. I'm the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. We are a platform for women who lead and believe. And today we are sitting down with our founder of Thrive Today, Colleen Rouse. Hello, hello.
Hello. It's so good to see you. This is always fun, and hopefully it's beneficial to all of our listeners and our viewers. I think that we have such a very interesting and blessed collaborative effort, and I don't take it lightly. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah. Well, hey, why don't you introduce our topic today? Because when you told me you wanted to talk about this topic, it resonated so deeply. And I was like, the women are going to get so much value out of this topic.
We're talking about criticism, how to handle it, and even how to give it in such a way that's positive. And I love talking about this because I will tell you that back in the day, I couldn't handle criticism. I was the worst. I would get defensive. And in fact, I remember a moment, and maybe you can relate to this if you're a mom of a child and you ever had the parent-teacher conference.
Yes.
And when my daughter was in kindergarten, my husband and I sit down with the teacher, and the teacher starts going through the list of things. And it was so funny as she's talking about Lauren is a little bit disruptive and talkative. And I felt like I needed to slink down in my seat because I felt like she was talking about me.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how criticism can land with us, and yet it can work for us.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think about criticism, and it's hard because, you know, I say this all the time, the feedback is a gift, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that, especially depending upon who's saying it, the package that it's coming in, whether or not this person, you know them well or not, and if you've had a long, healthy relationship with them or not, right? Have they already put deposits into the bank account, or do they just come to you with criticism? This can be really hard to wade through. So this is my question. How do you know the difference between constructive criticism, which helps us and feeds us and kind of drives us forward, and something that may feel more like a personal attack?
Wow. And you know, let's face it, most people are not adept at giving criticism. So therefore, we can anticipate there's things that are going to fly in our face. And we have to be careful, first of all. Let's talk about how we deal with it internally before we respond. And I think, so understanding that, number one. And I think secondly is to be prepared, to know that even as I step out, even before I get out of the bed, there's the potential for criticism. And there is the great possibility for it not to be given in a positive way. And so therefore, I'm going to have to control what I can control on my end. And so positioning myself, I mean, here's what helped me grow in this area, because like I said, I am not exaggerating. Like, I would just buck up the minute somebody started criticizing me. I would take it personal. So I wasn't even in a position to be able to discern between these two things that you refer to. So I had to say, okay, I am going to cultivate a heart of learning. And if I have a growth mindset, then that means that I'm going to have to learn how to find value, even in criticism, despite how it's administered. And I'm going to be adept at the ability to sit through a rebel of words, whether they're harsh or not, and to be able to glean from it. So I think that's, first of all, you have to come with this poisoned soul, and you have to operate that in that way. And so, therefore, that positions you to better discern, because a lot of times things feel very personal. And even if somebody doesn't say it personal, because there is something on the inside of us that feels the need to prove.
Yeah.
And so that gets challenged when somebody is finding fault. And so I would say that's first of all. And even if it is something that is mean and hurtful, you can find a way to sort through the rubble and say, what about this is true, Lord? What about this do I need to see?
Well, part of what I hear you saying is you have to kind of get your emotions in alignment. Like, you know, typically what happens is with someone that, let's say we don't have a super high level of trust with, Or maybe we really, really look up to them and we really care about what they think. When they speak something to us, it can feel like the gospel, right? It can feel like the absolute law of the letter, like, oh my gosh, this has to be true. But most of us kind of know about this idea of fight or flight that kind of exists when we get triggered and our emotions get triggered when someone is giving us feedback, constructive feedback or criticism. And oftentimes when that gets triggered, it is very hard to communicate in that moment. It's very hard to have a intelligent conversation in that moment because we're either thinking, I need to get out of here, get away from this conversation as fast as I can, or we're thinking, oh, no, you didn't. And it's time to fight. And so how do we calm ourselves down and actually receive the information that's being given to us, calm ourselves down enough to actually interpret that information, and maybe even come back later and have a more meaningful conversation? For me, I'm an internal processor. So I can't process on the fly with you in that moment. I need to think about what you're saying, and then I need to be able to come back and say, thank you for sharing that. Let me just share with you what I'm thinking. But that's just such a hard thing to do. It sounds really great, but in the moment, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, because we clearly, we're not robots, okay? We're not AI. And so you said a couple things that I want to highlight, because you said you're an internal processor, and I would probably be more of an external processor. But guess what? When it comes to criticism, we all need to be internal processors.
Wow.
And understand that what I tell myself, because I've been in many situations where, you know, something just comes, you're not expecting it, right? It comes flying in your face. And the need to answer and respond is there, because the way we process life, we take things in and first we experience it. But we have to, before we can respond at that point, which is your fight or flight, where I'm just going to immediately dismiss it or be defensive. And I will miss something if I do that. That is not the way I want to operate if I want to lead well. So therefore, I give myself permission to assess at another time. And sometimes when people are coming at you, obviously we don't know what place of health they're coming from. That's right. And so the more critical, the more sort of mean and ugly, mean-spirited, the less healthy that individual is. So me understanding and having compassion for them, it's interesting because the last place that you want to shut down or shut off compassion is when you're being criticized.
Wow.
It's in that moment where you loving, I'm helping to gain understanding. You loving helps you gain understanding as to what's underneath this, and therefore it changes how you respond to it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not talking about mechanics here. I'm talking about a spirit-led process. Mm-hmm. And so I have had just, you know, I think of something really funny when this woman came up to me one time. As a pastor's wife, you get scrutinized. And I've done something quite different with my hair. And she was like having the field day with me about my haircut. And all of a sudden, I just grabbed her hand and I patted her hand. I said, don't worry, it'll grow back, you know. And so it was such a blessing of the Lord to find humor in a situation. But obviously, most criticism is more serious than this. Yeah. So what I do oftentimes if somebody's saying something to me is, if we want to sort of kind of diffuse the moment, we can tell them you were heard. And so I will say, I heard you, and I will take this into consideration. I don't have a response for you in the moment. And you know what's interesting about even going through the process of saying this? You're talking about your emotions. It also kind of settles you down. Yeah. And it switches it to more critical thought process in your brain. This is what happens in the process of you responding in that format versus allowing it entrance. Mm-hmm. And it's the difference between guarding your heart and guarding yourself.
Oh, that's really good. The tendency when we receive feedback like this is to get very self-critical, to get down on ourselves, to beat ourselves up. Let's say that we heard that criticism. Maybe it was our first time hearing it. Maybe we might even agree with it when we hear it and it's a blind spot. Because there's different types of criticism, right? Sometimes you hear something and you're like, man, that just doesn't resonate. I hate that the person feels that way about me. I hate that I came off that way, but it doesn't resonate. Sometimes we hear something and we're like, huh, yep, it resonates.
Spot on. Yeah.
But then there's this little insidious thing that can happen where we go away and we just play it over and over again in our mind. And then we start to beat ourselves up. And that is the absolute worst.
It is. And I would say that that happens frequently with us. You know, it's usually when somebody's criticizing us for something, it's not the first time we've heard it. We've heard it wrong internally. And it's usually areas where we're stuck. And so there is frustration involved. And so then they just poking that point of frustration with us. And so it can cause us to feel more defeated. And so no wonder they're going to get a rise out of us. So this self-critic, I mean, let's talk about the self-critic is, I understand King David, what an amazing leader. Yes, he made some leadership errors. That's putting it lightly. Right.
Maybe not as big as David, but we've all made.
But he learned something even as a teenager, where he would say, Lord, search me if there be any evil way in me. And so this sort of offering this approachability to God to speak to us about things, if there's someone, if I have a list of preference and say, number one, who would you want to be the person to offer criticism to you? Number one on that list for me would be the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
Because he will be honest, but he will be gracious. And so if I am of the mindset, and it is a part of my spiritual discipline to invite him, when we say, show me evil ways, show me what that encompasses is a lot. It means, what are the areas where I'm weak? What are the areas where I'm believing a lie? You know, it's very helpful, but here's the thing. Honestly, we have to give him permission to get to that level of conversation with us. We really need to invite him to do so. And then, because he's not just going to point out the problem, he's going to lead us to a solution.
That's right. Well, here's a thought that I have. How do you handle it when it does require a response? Maybe not in that moment, but it does require a response. I think about the fact that we just came out of, performance review season. We're kind of fresh out of that season. And so sometimes you'll sit down with someone who's doing your performance review, and they may speak over you things that you just maybe don't agree with. You just don't see how they would see you that way. And eventually it's going to require a response. How do you navigate it when they did get it wrong and you want to address that you don't feel that that's an accurate perception of you? How do you do that in a way where it doesn't come off completely defensive and completely like, you're unwilling to listen to feedback?
Well, and this goes back to what we already said. Most people don't know how to give constructive criticism. So you have superiors as you're answering to, and they might not be adept at this. And so I think firstly is, how concrete is this evidence? Is this empirical evidence? Are there examples of this? Or are these perceptions that they gathered from, our coworkers? Because nonetheless, if this is the way people feel about us, when you do 360s, some of this is supposed to just be a visceral response and people are going to say things and respond, then I think we have to take a hard, fast look at this because our blind spots do not benefit us. Right. And again, back to this, I want to have courage to face criticism. Yeah. That's what it requires. And as I grow in my courage, I can say, okay, I think in those situations, the best thing is to ask more questions. Yeah. So in other words, let's say I'm being criticized for being late in my response. And if I know that I, in fact, am not the cog in the wheel, that I am moving projects forward, then I would ask the question, okay, so if this is what's being said about me, it doesn't align with what I can prove, but I am interested. So there you've done two things. I'm interested in knowing what this perception is and the why behind it. So you're expressing the willingness to learn and investigate and know what's at the root of this. But secondly, you're not taking criticism that's undue. Yeah. And I don't think we just need to lay down and let people just say whatever. So that's professional behavior, right? And as a leader, one of my favorite books, Good to Great, he talks about leaders have to have courage to look at the squiggly things under the rocks. Okay, so taking a walk in nature, kicking that rock over, there are things crawling underneath that aren't visible. So if I'm a leader and there's undercurrent about me, I want to be aware of it. And sometimes it's about one individual, but if it's a perception that exists throughout the organization, I need to be aware of it. And then I need to take back to prayer. And I need to say, Lord, how do I help alter this?
So good. Something I've learned over the years, and it aligns with what you're saying, is that their perception of you is their reality of you. And whether it's true or untrue, their perception of you becomes their reality of you. And so even I think about the fact that 50% of the text messages that we send are misinterpreted. I had somebody once tell me that they felt like I was mad at them when I text them, which I don't know how you interpret anger through text, but I said, help me understand. And they said, well, when so-and-so texts me, there's a lot of emojis and and I'm like, well, I said, let me help you understand me a little bit. I said, I grew up in a background in IT, working mostly with men. I said, you didn't communicate like that. You'd be deemed extremely unprofessional and you'd be dismissed. I said, so my communication style and the way I text is just an extension of my upbringing. It definitely does not interpret how I feel about anything we're texting about. I said, I said, I can definitely work on that when I'm texting with you, because that's something that person needs in particular. However, I don't know that would change the way I would text with everybody, but asking those follow-up questions is really important, because I was really, really surprised by their answer and never in a million years would have guessed that would have been their answer to that question. And so important for us to ask follow-up questions, to dig in a little deeper, but also to understand that, and I believe this is so true, all feedback must be weighed. Not everything weighs the same.
You have to weigh it. Yes, absolutely. And I think some of the things what can we do to ward off some of this as far as the criticism in this case that you pointed out? When you have team members, when I've hired people, I've sat down with them and I said, okay, this is my leadership style. And yes, I'm here to serve you and I'm here to lead you. But understand that in the moment, I am probably more like, okay, this is a battlefield. And when I'm in a battlefield moment, I'm just going to be less conversational. Yeah. And so I try to give them some understanding so that they don't misinterpret. I feel like, can I arm them to help them to be less sensitive?
That's right.
And we get rid of, let's face it, there are a lot more filters these days than we used to have. And so we can either adapt ourselves to meet the filter, or we can help them to dismiss some of the filters and see things clearly.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this is kind of the last question I have on this, and I think it's a really important one that we all need to think about. So sometimes, we have people that fall into different spectrums of how they receive feedback. Some get feedback once a year, if that, which is really unfortunate. I think frequent feedback, that's hard to say.
Yes, it is.
It's really important for everybody to grow as a leader. So whether I will say, like it or not, it's so healthy for us to get this feedback. But how do we, kind of take this feedback in, but not have it pierce our confidence or our self-worth? I think that's the hardest thing to do, to pull that line between receiving that feedback in, looking at how we kind of transform ourselves over time as a result of that feedback, but not allow it to just erode our self-confidence and our confidence in who God called us to be.
That is such a great question. And I think it's just along the line of self-awareness. Our tendency to be defensive comes from this place that it's often tied to shame. Yeah. And I would just say, honestly, as we walk through life, we're operating at some level with a shame grid over our mentality. So that is something that between us and the Lord, we have to learn to deal with. But it's attached to us as we walk this earth. So when we understand that, then what is the argument? What is the pain point here? A lot of times it's tied to our own sense of shame. So this is where my desire to grow has to be at the forefront. And so I have taken the position, in fact, I have a coach who I will say she's pretty tough, but this is what I wanted. And I said, I want you to give me brutal honesty. And so at the time it hits you, it can hurt. Man, it hurt. It stung. Of like, I'm doing that. And, I asked her to take one of our coaching calls and just kind of dissect it. And she was spot on. And so immediately I said, okay, if you have permission to be brutally honest with me, then you also are going to help me through this process. Yeah. So once I recovered, I said, okay, tell me how to learn. The quicker you get to solution, the faster you are on your feet to get to that place, then you're starting towards the path of success.
Yeah. This is so good. I've seen over the years people that are masters at receiving feedback. And I think it's just such a powerful thing as a leader for you to master the ability to receive criticism and feedback, to not take it personally, to probe and ask better questions, get curious, ask more information, and then take that away and weigh it. Because not all feedback weighs the same amount, right?
No.
Some is heavy and it needs to be for a reason because it's a blind spot. Some it may hit heavy because they don't know how to actually deliver that feedback to you, but it actually needs to feel very light because that person, if someone who I've been around for 10 years, I'm going to take their feedback and criticism differently than someone I met 6 months ago and wants to tell me how it is. I mean, I'm going to review both of those. I'm going to consider both. I'm going to weigh the one that I've known for 10 years and it's been in my life a long time. And I know it was probably hard for them to sit down and give me that feedback and criticism, but I have to trust that they care about me, they love me, and that they want me to grow and they're helping me with the blind spot. So I think intention is everything when it comes to criticism.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, if you liked this, next time we're going to actually talk about how to give criticism and feedback. Because here's the thing. I think that especially, I think about my leadership journey. I don't know about you. Nobody taught me how to give people hard feedback. It was something I had to learn, and I learned it the hard way. So next time, tune in. We'll talk about that. So thank you for your time today. This was fun, but this was really good. This was so good. Well, ladies, we are so excited for you to join us. Most of us are doing New Year's resolutions in 2025, and yours should be to join the Thrive Today community. Head over to thrivetoday.com to learn more about us and our community and glean from coaching calls so that you can grow your leadership, so that you can expand your network and be around like-minded people like you. So ladies, until next time, we want you to lead with courage. We'll see you then.